So as Memorial Day fastly approaches, I picked up some reading material that would get me into the spirit of what this holiday truly means. That being people who died for us, for this country, and for free people around the world. There's 3 books I want to talk to you about. They were really impactful for me, and I want to tell you why I went through them, but I also want to tell you more importantly, how it affects me and how I think it affects us going forward in this country. And we're going to start right now. Hi, my name is Kyle, and welcome to my channel. Here we take culture, TV, and movies, and we filter it right. If this is your first time here, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button, also that bell icon so you don't miss any future content. And so here's the thing. I didn't just pick up 3 books. I picked up 1 book that I thought was interesting. And like I said, I was going through my app on my phone. There was this new app that ties into your library card, and you can basically get audiobooks. And I put this 1 book on hold, and it took me 6 months to get it. I didn't think it would ever come in. In fact, I forgot about it. But I got an email that said, hey, your book's ready. And this book is called The First Conspiracy, The Plot to Kill George Washington. Cool, right? I mean, how cool of a title is that? It's by a guy named Brad Meltzer. And in the very beginning, he says how difficult it was to put this book together. In fact, he even talked to Joseph Ellis, who wrote His Excellency, which is probably considered the prominent biography on George Washington. And even he said that this was going to be a difficult task for you to pull together. So Brad went ahead and spent years pulling this information together. And sure enough, he uncovered the conspiracy. And let me tell you something. This book is an audiobook. It's 11 hours. But I'm telling you right now, this is pretty fascinating. If you have any inkling at all in history or conspiracies, whatever, you'd be fascinated by this, because you would think that people back then didn't have that kind of, wherewithal to pull stuff together. But this was a huge conspiracy which involved all branches of government. And I'm not going to spoil anything for you. In fact, the less you know about it, the better. Go into it blind, but understand there was a strong possibility that George Washington would have been killed or kidnapped. And if he'd been kidnapped, he would have been killed because he would have been a traitor and he would have been hanged more than likely. And what's interesting about this, and I will say this, is that the book involves people of a hodgepodge, an uncanny element of people who come together through happenstance, through luck, through chance, or what George Washington would say, through providence, to thwart this plot, because obviously we know how it ends, but how it comes together is really fascinating. And I would dare you to put this thing down, whether you stop the play button or if you put the book down. It's really difficult, in my opinion, to do that. It's the way he tells the story. He'll jump from one scene to another. He'll jump from a saddle from a horse to a headquarters here, or to a dungeon or a prison, or to a counterfeiter's lodge. And he'll take these characters around, these different scenes. But every single scene, he sets up the next scene with a cliffhanger. So you're like, oh my goodness, this is a really short chapter, which they're really short. The chapters are only like 5 pages long. They're really short. And it keeps your attention there because every chunk of information is in a small bite, and they all end in a little cliffhanger, which makes you want to read more. And it's really fascinating how he does it. It's bravo to you, Brad. You are a brilliant writer. And so that got me going. And so the second book, because this book was such a fun read, and I didn't want to stop, I picked up the second book, and that was called George Washington's Secret Six, The Spy Ring That Saved the American Revolution, and it's by a guy named Brian Kilmeade. And if you're familiar with anything up in Long Island from a historical standpoint, it's going to be either basically dealing with Teddy Roosevelt, or it's going to be dealing with the Culper spy ring. And it's this Culper spy ring, which is what this entire book is about. In fact, there is an AMC series that just wrapped up 4 seasons. You can catch it on Netflix, by the way, called Turn, Washington Spies. Now, I recommend you read this book first. This is pretty short. You can go through it in about 6.5 hours. If you do audio, if you want to read it on your own, I can't imagine it taking longer than a couple of days. But read the book first, because all the plot points that are in AMC Turn are in here. This is more condensed. Obviously, you're dealing with a 40-part series, and so they fill stuff in. But the main highlight points are all going to be found in the book as well, because the series is based on the book. And this was another thing that was very difficult for them to pull together, because one thing about these books and these conspiracies is that when they're historically accurate, is that the conspiracy's whole point is to be secret. So they're not trying to leave breadcrumbs along the way. And one of the reasons why this story is even known is because George Washington himself wrote letters and kept those around so that these people would be known in the future. Because without these people, this country would not exist. I've said before that there was three things that the revolution needed to win the war. They needed to keep George Washington alive. They needed to keep the army together. They needed to get the French help from a naval standpoint so they could combat the naval power of Great Britain. Those three things were all secured by Washington's spies. In fact, this is actually a sequel to the first book, The First Conspiracy. The First Conspiracy was dealing with George Washington dealing with a situation that he didn't know anything about. They just happened to happen. He realized he needed to have something in place called counterintelligence, which is really the precursor to the CIA. And then he started having smaller spies like Nathan Hale, and then from there that grew into the Cooper spy ring. So this is truly a sequel of sorts. And so it was this spy ring that saved this country, that was able to pull people together in all diverse places. This particular book had 6 people, and they're all highlighted in the TV series, but one is 355, which was a female. We don't know her identity, but she was very critical in securing all of this. And it's just really, really cool to see. And the bravery that these people bestowed was really, really cool. And so Washington's Secret 6, the spy ring that saved the American Revolution, is a quick 6-hour go through audio, about a day and a half. If you want to read it, definitely worth your effort. Check it out. So before I break into my third book, let me give you a little backstory of myself and where I'm coming from. I grew up in Washington, D.C. area, and I worked for the federal government, and I loved history. I loved being in that area. I worked for the Smithsonian for a summer or two, actually, and I was able to go through the museum when no one was there because we were closing up or we were opening up or whatever, and I had a good 2 or 3 hours to just hang out and just see what I want to see and go places that no one could go to and see stuff with like John Paul Jones's letters and stuff like that. So I was always fascinated. And I was always fascinated with, just the story and how these things came together to form this country, because the pieces that this country were brought together was happenstance. It shouldn't have happened. And as I get into my third book, you'll really see that we really shouldn't be here. I mean, it's really a miracle that this country was able to come together the way it did. And my fascination with this is what made me be the person I am today. It's one of the reasons why I have this channel, one of the reasons why I want to tell people these stories, because one thing about stories is it helps people understand and relate that these people were just people. They were scared. They didn't know how this thing was going to happen. I mean, we had the advantage because we're looking back and seeing what happened. But when they're in the thick of it, they had no idea what was going to happen. All they know is they're going to go from A to B, and maybe they'll die, or maybe they'll get some shoes, or maybe they'll get a fresh set of clothes, or maybe they'll have a fire, or maybe they'll have somewhere to sleep and be dry. That's what they're thinking about, And so it's really what the people of that time called providence. It's what drove a lot of people. And George Washington himself, which is one of the reasons why I picked him, is because he epitomizes, he embodies this country and what we stand for. And because he fought so hard to keep the army together. And that was what really, really was the crux of the Revolutionary War and the foundation of this country, was keeping us together. That's what it was. United we stand, divided we fall. And that's really the theme of this country in general, is keeping us together. And George Washington was able to do that, which is why I think he was probably the greatest American there was. And so with that, this is the perfect lead-in to my last book called To Try Men's Souls, and it's by Newt Gingrich and William Forstchen. And so what To Try Men's Souls is about, it's basically a story of the Army of the Continentals going from one side of the Delaware River over to the other in Trenton, where they were going to surprise the Hessian garrison who was in charge of watching George Washington's army during that winter. They did this on Christmas Day because they felt it would be the perfect time to surprise them. And if you thought that this would just be a simple A to B thing, you'd be utterly wrong. These people who did this particular journey, this particular march, were superhuman. Most of them didn't have any shoes. In fact, most of them were in such bad shape physically that they shouldn't even have been alive. They had diphtheria, they had stomach problems, they had diseases, they were malnourished, they were ill-equipped. By the time they got to the other side of the Delaware River, they were already soaking wet. It was a blistering snowstorm with the ice in the river freezing over. The boat crossing took hours longer than it should have. And when they were supposed to get there at night, they didn't. They got there in broad daylight. And at that point, the Hessian army could easily have spotted them. And just the things that didn't happen, things that didn't transpire, the things that were set in place to totally destroy George Washington's army didn't happen. And you can't look at this as any other way other than a miracle. And when you read this, you'll see what I'm talking about. That's the first aspect of it. The second aspect of it is dealing with Thomas Paine writing the crisis. So he wrote this back in November, which is about a month prior to the crossing. And you get into Thomas Paine's head of how he felt about writing this. Everybody wanted him to write something because he was the one who had written Common Sense. Common Sense was the essay that pretty much sparked the revolution. Now, these were ideas that had already been out there, but he just put them all together. And him being from a mindset of total hardship himself, that he came up from nothing, and the thought that he could be somebody regardless of his stature in life really motivated him. And so now they called on him again to write something that's going to inspire the army to go forward. You don't understand. At this point in time, the Continental Army was about to be destroyed. They had lost every single battle. They should have been destroyed many other times, but George Washington was an expert at retreating and keeping his army together. And this struggle, the more I read about it, is just incredibly fascinating. And so what this story does is, like I said, it's 11 hours. It goes through this entire long trek in great detail about how long it took them to walk, or what they were eating, and what they were talking about, and so forth. And I can't stress enough how important stuff like this is for people today to get a hold of. And so I strongly recommend these 3 books, because once you read them, you're going to have such a burst of pride in your country. You're going to have such a burst of pride in the people who died for all of this, that we stand on the shoulders of these people. And regardless of what you think about the founding fathers or the people of that period, what their thoughts were, what their belief systems were, the fact is they understood their own frailties, and they put those frailties in a document, the Constitution, where they could be perfected. Because they knew stuff like slavery was going to be dying, but they couldn't find a way to get rid of it then. But they put it in there so that it could be eradicated. You look at any other country around the world, that didn't happen. That didn't happen at all. But in this country, they put forth a model, a plan, something that will allow future generations who are smarter, who are more enlightened, to fix the problems before. And I think we've done a great job at that. And so I feel that books like this need to be shared and expressed. And I think people's passion in these stories need to come out, because it's this passion that's going to get people to want to be inspired to actually read this. And with the fact that these audiobooks, now you can even go through your library card and hook up to this app called Libby, and you can get these for free. I waited 6 months for this, and when it finally came in, I was so excited because, to me, it's just something that, I was wanting to know about. I didn't know about this conspiracy of George Washington. And now I want to just listen to more and more and more. And so I'm on my 4th book now, and just wanted to share that with you. I'm going to do another video probably tomorrow dealing with Memorial Day, and I hope you guys enjoyed this. If I rambled on, I apologize. This is probably a longer video than normal, but I hope that this is something that you can be inspired to pick something up, and comment below if you have read any of these books, or if there's a book that you think that I would like, please comment below on this. And if you like the content on this channel where we take culture, TV, and movies and we filter it right, please hit that like and subscribe button, that bell icon, so you don't miss any future content. And please also, as always, check out some content that we have right here.